As China continues to move away from their zero COVID measures, they actually put into place 10 items that the cities and provinces should be following as they sort of walk away from these zero COVID measures. And it looks like they're essentially downplaying the effects of Omicron. And so that's what I want to cover in this video, because it's really good news for a lot of us who've held tight on our Chinese investments, knowing that this zero COVID stuff would eventually go away. So as you guys smash that like button, let me run that intro. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is really good news. It's well received, and I know a lot of you guys have seen this stuff trickle out throughout the last couple of days, so I did just want to cover it off with one video. And so here's what I've seen that was reported on Bloomberg. Now, it's very particular to wait for Bloomberg to issue something, because Bloomberg has notoriously been sort of like negative on China and Chinese stocks, and so it's interesting that now Bloomberg is reporting this, and this is what I wanted to see. So China's top medical advisor says that Omicron risks are similar to the flu, and a lot of people would say no duh, but better late than never, right? And so at least it's being recommended now. Hopefully this changes the mind of the population in China. And just going into the article a little bit, you can see here that Chinese officials continue to downplay the risks of COVID-19 as restrictions are being eased, with the top medical advisor saying that the fatality rate from the Omicron variant of the virus is in line with influenza, and we in the West, we know that. And so the death rate from Omicron is around 0.1%, similar to the common flu, and the infection rarely reaches lungs. The nation did report 10,500 local infections for Saturday, which they're referring to Saturday, December 10th, which is more than a week ago, and it's more than 20% lower than the Friday. And so doubts have been raising about the accuracy of the case numbers because, of course, fewer people are getting tested. So, of course, if you test fewer people, you're just going to get fewer positives. And, if you want to move away from a zero COVID policy, that's kind of what you have to do. You have to test less, especially when it comes to like asymptomatic cases. And I did mention that the Communist Party, the CCP, did issue 10 mandates or measures that the provinces and cities should be following. And before we get into those 10 rules that China will follow before getting into the path of reopening, notice that there is some other good news. It looks like they're essentially just waiting for Chinese scientists to reach a consensus that the variations of the coronavirus continue to be less dangerous. And so once they reach that consensus, which I do believe will be soon, I do think that China will downgrade its COVID control and just downgrade it from a category A to a category B. I think that might be a good catalyst. Now, I don't think any of these catalysts will cause the stock to surge for Alibaba or Tencent or anything that we own, but it's a step in the right direction. That's all I'm hoping for here. And so what exactly are these 10 new measures? Well, let's take a look at them. For the first one is, be precise in categorizing high risk areas. So essentially, it just means don't lock down the whole city. And so that's essentially what they're saying. Refraining from extending lockdowns at will to an entire housing compound, neighborhood, or street. So I think this will go a long way in cooling down protests. And at the end of the day, in order to maintain power and sort of stability over the country, they need to make sure that they don't cause the population to protest. And so this, I think, the first one, it's not an accident that this was the first measure. This will go a long way to cool down the protest. The second one is reduce mass testing frequency and further minimize its scale. So negative tests or green health code on contact tracing smartphone apps will no longer be required to access most public areas. And I think that, once again, will be a big deal to sort of like restart the economy. Nobody wants to go into any sort of public place where they're shopping and then realize that it gets locked down and they're sort of like shut into that particular location, like whether it be a grocery store, and they have to sort of like live there for 24 to 48 hours, which is some of the stuff that was happening previously. And so once again, the major thing that this will do is, if you're just minimizing the frequency of testing, then you're going to bring down the number of asymptomatic positive cases, which of course will help quell the worries in the population. The third measure is that asymptomatic and mild COVID cases can stay at home or voluntarily go to centralized quarantine facilities for 7 days, and close contacts can quarantine at home for 5 days. So that's very positive. The last thing you want to do is be quarantined with other sick people. Again, this will help alleviate the fears over the COVID pandemic as a whole. The fourth measure is that lockdowns in high-risk areas will be lifted if there are no new cases for 5 consecutive days. And so no bureaucrat saying, hey, you know what, there haven't been any new measures, but we're going to keep this lockdown for another 2 or 3 weeks, which is some of the stuff that has been happening. So this one's very important. This, in my opinion, is what started off the protests, and it started at the universities. And so if you were paying attention to this, go back and look at how the university students started protesting this to begin with. The fifth measure, and I don't really know what this is hitting at, and you guys might know more than I do, so make a comment in the comments below just to allow me to learn a little bit more, but ensure the availability of medicine for the public. And so pharmacies cannot close at will, and no purchase limits for medication will be allowed. And so this is a little bit weird for me, because you would think that they would want purchase limits just to make sure that everybody is getting medication and not one person is hoarding it. And so you guys have to let me know exactly what they're talking about there. I don't really know what the issues were. I think it might be that not everybody's getting access to medications, but wouldn't sort of like a limit on the number of medications being purchased by any one particular family help with that? It just doesn't make sense to me. But once again, there's a lot of you guys who know this better than I do, so let me know, especially the guys who watch this channel who live in the country. I know there's quite a few of you. I'm hoping for you to help me just learn a little bit better as it relates to that fifth measure right there. Now, going into the back half, I think the sixth measure is probably the most important one, and this is the one that's going to get you out of this situation. You have to accelerate the vaccination for the most vulnerable, which is the elderly. And so they have to establish green lanes and mobile vaccination spots, and consider incentives to promote vaccine usage. Yes, 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 and so much more yes. This is the way we're going to get out of this. The seventh measure is enhancing the monitoring of populations still at risk for COVID. Once again, these two go hand in hand. And, you know, there are people who believe that there are risks with the vaccines, and I understand that there are, or there could be, but the science is out, and it really helps the people that are most at risk, which would be the elderly. The eighth measure is that the low-risk areas are not allowed to control movement or suspend any services, work, or production. So this paves the way to eliminate any situations where public officials are, you know, being a little bit too cautious and locking down sort of low-risk areas or controlling movements or services or anything along those lines. And so I think, once again, this will cause you to get to normal much faster. Now, number 9, and once again, this will stop the protests again. Forbid the blockage of emergency exits or apartment entrances. Recall, guys, the reason why the major protests in China began was because they blamed the death of people on the inability for the fire trucks and ambulances to get through to the apartment building because of COVID-related blockages. And so escape routes must stay open in the event of a medical emergencies or hazard. So is this China's way of just admitting that that is what caused those deaths? You know what I mean? And so I'm glad that this is in here, but notice how all of this is in response to things that have gone wrong as a result of their zero COVID policy. And so the 10th item is improve pandemic control measures on school campuses. So schools with COVID cases must be precise in categorizing high-risk areas and ensure that low-risk areas continue as per normal. And so once again, this started because, recall, guys, and you guys may not be aware, the protests began in the universities and in the schools. And so it's important to make sure that if there are no risks or very low risks, these things stay open. And so these 10 measures, I think, in my opinion, go a long way into making sure that this zero COVID issue goes away. But we're now entering 2023, a couple of years since COVID began. And, you know, even if the COVID risks go away, we have a bigger risk, which is the economic risk. And, you know, especially the slowdown of the West. If China's a manufacturing hub of the West, then of course, if fewer items are demanded, then there's going to be fewer items produced in China, which of course will hurt the economy as well. So I think that that's the number one risk going into 2023. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, the other thing that I do want to point out is that the US government recently pushed a bipartisan bill to at least ban TikTok on government-related devices. And so my question is, are we moving down a path where TikTok could potentially be banned in North America, or at least in the US? And if that happens, how good of a story is that for Meta? And so I actually investigated all of that, and you can get to that video right here.